Today I will talk about the anatomical terms and cavities. So as you can see, I'm using my sister. She looks tortured, but she has nothing else better to do, so I have to use what I got since I have nothing else. So first we're going to start with anterior. It is towards the front of the body, and posterior, it's towards the back of the body. So an example of anterior would be that the windpipe is anterior to the esophagus, and an example for posterior would be that the heart is posterior to the sternum. Another term is superior. Superior means that a body part is above another body part. So we could say that the face is superior to the neck. So the opposite of it is inferior. Inferior is a body part that is below another body part. So we could say that the navel is inferior to the chin, because the chin's all the way to the face while the navel's all the way to the belly button. Another term they use is medial. Medial means that a body part is closer to the midline. You could say that the nose is medial to the ears. And the opposite would be lateral. Lateral means that there's a body part that is away from the midline. An example would be that the ears are lateral to the nose since it's away from the midline. Another term they use is proximal. Proximal is a body part that is closer to a specific point of origin, meaning that, let's say, the shoulder is the attachment, and you would say that the elbow is proximal to the hand since they're in the same attachment. And distal would be a body part that's farther from the attachment. So it would be maybe like below. So let's take hip for an example. You would say that the foot is distal to the knee. Superficial. Superficial is a body part that is located closer to the surface, meaning it's more to the skin, sort of ish. The sternum is superficial to the heart. Not that I'm saying that it's like the skin, but I'm saying it's higher, not really deep. And that leads us to the next term, which is deep. It's literally self-explanatory to what it means. It's just a body part that is located farther from the surface and basically deep. So you could say that the brain is deep to the skull. I think I get mixed up with this because, I always think, superficial is the skin. But no, it's just like above than deep, Another term is ipsilateral. Ipsilateral is a body part that's on the same side of another body part. So you could say that the right arm is ipsilateral to the right leg. They're on the same side. And the opposite of that is contralateral. Contralateral is a body part that is on the opposite side of another body part. So you would say the left hand is contralateral to the right leg. They're on opposite sides. So I think this is what medical professionals use before performing a surgery. It kind of tells where they cut the body. So the first term is a sagittal plane. This means that the body is divided into right and left portions. The frontal plane is perpendicular to a sagittal plane and divides the body into anterior and posterior portions. And transverse plane is basically like a horizontal cut of the body. And there's another term called the parasagittal plane, which it either cuts the left portion only the left portion or only the right portion, but it has to be within like the sagittal plane. I will be talking about the two main body cavities that we have. There is the dorsal body cavity and the ventral body cavity. So the dorsal body cavity is mainly from the back of your head to your tail, and it contains the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. The cranial cavity has your brain, and the vertebral cavity has your spinal cord, while the ventral body cavity is mainly towards the front of your body. It contains the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity, which the thoracic cavity contains the mediastinum, which also contains the heart, trachea, esophagus, basically everything that's medial or the central portion of the body. The thoracic cavity also contains the lungs. The abdominal pelvic cavity contains basically the stomach, the intestines, the small intestines, gallbladder, basically everything inside your stomach. Or not inside your stomach, but everything in the abdominal area and pelvic. Also, if you're wondering why my sister is like dancing and lip syncing, it's because she's bored and she made me put songs for her, so yeah. So in this clip, I will be drawing the cavities of the body, and I'm not the best artist, so don't expect too much. The difference between the dorsal body cavity and the ventral body cavity is that the dorsal body cavity has three membrane layers called the meninges. The meninges is a protective membranous covering the brain and the spinal cord, while the ventral cavity has two membrane layers called the serous membrane. And the serous membrane is a membrane that covers internal organs and lines cavities. So there is a fluid called the serous fluid that basically reduces friction of the internal organs, because if that would happen, the organs would pretty much just hit each other, and I don't think that'd be a good idea. That could probably lead to inflammation. So basically that just protects the organs and keep them in shape, and it keeps them in their own station. Also, the serous fluid is between the visceral serous membrane and the parietal serous membrane. So the visceral serous membrane is basically a serous membrane that covers the surface of an organ, while the parietal serous membrane covers the inner body wall. So now we're going to focus on the lungs. So there is a membrane called pleura, which is a serous membrane that covers the lungs and the lines of the chest and the diaphragm. So kind of like the serous membrane, but it's mainly focused on the lungs. It also has a visceral pleura and a parietal pleura. And the visceral pleura is a membrane that covers the surface of the lungs. So in between the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura is the pleural cavity, which contains a small amount of pleural fluid. So the pleural cavity is not like a big brick wall that, protects the whole thoracic cavity. It's just a fluid-filled space that surrounds the lungs. So now we're just going to move on to the heart. So the heart also contains a parietal pericardium and visceral pericardium. So a parietal pericardium is the outer layer of the two layers of the serous pericardium lining the fibrous pericardium. Basically just the outside of the heart, the outer layer of the heart. And the visceral pericardium is the inner layer of the serous pericardium. It is the contact with the heart and the roots of the vessels of the heart. So in between the parietal and the visceral pericardium is the pericardial fluid. Pretty much all together, that completes the pericardial cavity, which is the cavity around the heart created by the pericardial sac. So now we're going to move on to the abdominal pelvic cavity. So the abdominal pelvic has the parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum. So the parietal peritoneum lines the abdominal and the pelvic walls and the inferior surface of the thoracic diaphragm, while the visceral peritoneum is a membrane that covers the surfaces of organs within the abdominal cavity. So in all, the parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum has a fluid called the peritoneal fluid that is in between. So every fluid that I named that surrounded an organ basically is there to just keep every organ in place, because if the organs were just not in place, there would be an inflammation. Now I'm just going to fast forward through this video. So I just want to give props to my sister for being my dummy. And I really learned a lot actually just by doing this, because I practically drew it out, and I practically explained it. So thank you, Mr. Tompkins. This is actually really fun and funny. So yeah.